Thank you, Joyce, for sharing your Springfield story with us today. And we'll just get started, and I'll ask you, please, if you'll tell us your full name, when you were born, and where.
Okay, my name is Joyce Butler Hires. I was born December 29th, 1935, right here in Jacksonville, Florida, at St. Vincent's Hospital over in Riverside.
Okay. We're going to start talking about your family. I know you shared that your grandparents moved to Springfield. So let's start there.
Okay. My grandparents came here, I believe, from Cochran, Georgia. They came here from Georgia. And they bought, I think, one of the first homes built on First Street over in Springfield. It was in the 1920s, probably the late 20s.
Do you remember the address?
Oh, yeah. 218 East First Street. And I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother, and I used to love to play in her backyard, and we played cork ball and with the children on the next street, and I enjoyed staying there a lot. And my grandfather got killed when I was only 3 years old, so that was in 1938, and he worked for the, I guess he must have worked for the city. He inspected bridges, and he was inspecting the Main Street Bridge, and he stepped on a part that was not secured, and he fell into the river and broke his back. And so my grandmother was left at home with 3 children still at home. She had 9 children, but 3 of them were still at home. And I had an aunt that was just 6 years older than I was, so my aunt loved to take me off with her, and we would go walk down First Street through Confederate Park to downtown Jacksonville, and go to May Cohen's and go in their little candy department, get us some candy. And I don't think we probably didn't have money to have lunch there at that time. We probably went on down to Woolworth's and did that, but we did a lot of shopping with Lerner's and Baker's and all the stores there. And
let's back up for just a second. What were your grandparents' names?
Bessie, her maiden name was Asbel, but it was Bessie Purser, and his name was Rob Purser. I can't even think of my granddaddy, Robert Purser.
Okay. All right, and let's talk a little bit about the house that they lived in.
Okay.
Describe it for us.
It's a very large house, and it was, they lived next door to a house that was called the Walt May, and that was kind of they didn't call them bread and breakfast back then, but it was that sort of thing, and that was a real beautiful home. And the one across the street, I think, was an attorney, and that was a very beautiful home. Theirs was a real nice place, a very large place. So after my granddaddy died, she rented out places upstairs, and she just lived downstairs.
Was that common in the neighborhood?
Yes, very. You never locked a door. You just left your doors open, and everybody came in at night, and doors always stayed open. And everybody was family. We all sat on the front porch, and I remember a lot of the rumors, even names. We had grandmother always entertained for Christmas, and all the upstairs people and the family would all have a big Christmas party, and my aunt was a pianist, which she loved to play, and we'd all meet in grandmother's rooms and sing and have a good time. And that aunt of mine, she also worked at May Cohen's, and I think back then Hallie Cohen's is what my uncle used to call them because he knew them. But she worked in the mezzanine playing the sheet music at Cohen's for a good while.
What was her name?
Her name was Dolly Purser, Dolly Sue Purser.
Do you remember what some of the people who rented rooms from your mom, what brought them there? Did they work in the area, or do you remember?
Okay, that was 60 years more, 70 years ago. No, I don't remember. I remember some of the names, but Lily Spires, I remember that name. Lily and Arthur Spires is one that really comes out, and I have no idea what they did. They both worked. And trying to think of some of the others. I don't remember their names.
No? Okay, okay. That just popped in my head. I wonder
Thank you.
what these people were doing. Okay. Do you know why your grandparents came to Springfield?
I have no idea why, unless he changed jobs and went with the railroad. He was with the railroad, unless he changed jobs and came here to do what he was doing.
Okay.
Is the only thing I can think of.
What was everyday life like at your grandparents' house?
Well, I only remember up to, from the time, I remember what I was told earlier. I remember my mother telling me about leaving me with my grandmother on the bed, and my grandmother went across the street to church, and when my mother came home, I'd fallen off of the bed, was in the floor. And that's what she thought about her church. It came first, so that was Springfield Baptist Church, and it's still there. And then as I got older, I used to go with her all the time. She didn't have to leave me home on the bed, but she did leave me, but she was right across the street, but my mother had a fit. But everyday life with grandmother was, she cooked, and she made biscuits, and you'd see her little fat, short self in the kitchen. She was like 4 foot something, and as my uncle used to say, 5'2", 4 foot wide and 4 foot tall, because they were very tiny people. I told you my uncle was a jockey because he was tiny. But she was a typical grandmother. She wasn't a modern day grandmother. She wore little smock dresses. You never saw grandmother in a pair of shorts or anybody else come to her house in a pair of shorts. You never saw cards played. You never saw dice thrown in her house. But she was a typical grandmother in her little smocks and apron, and cooked all the time. And if she had more than enough, upstairs came down and ate with her. She made jellies and jams and wine. We couldn't smoke or play cards, but she made her wine. And the best I remember, she put it in big tubs in the bathroom. And they shared a bathroom at that point. In the back of there was I don't know, it kind of sectioned off, and there was a big part of the bathroom, and another rent out was on the side down there. So you could go in the bathroom on either door. So when you got in there, you had to make sure you blocked both doors, or you're going to surprise somebody. But she was just a typical grandmother, and she died at a very young age. She was, I guess she was in her maybe 60 or late 50s. She went to the hospital and was doing real well. Had, I think, a gallbladder operation, and then she had some attack. Mother was walking her down the floor, and she died the day before she was supposed to come home. So that was kind of distraught for all of us. And I had just gotten married, so she was, I can't figure out how old she would have been. I don't know.
Okay.
But she was not an old person. I didn't get to see her. And I only knew my granddaddy for 3 years, so I don't even hardly remember him, except he was a very tall man. I remember that. But and she was a little short. She was probably 4'6" or 7.
And what happened with her house after she passed away?
She left it to my uncle, which was a jockey, and he traveled all the time.
Do you remember his name?
Oh yeah, Jimmy Purser. I got pictures of him and him riding and winning, and get the pictures out of the thing in there with his. But he went, Dr. Collins, which was a Springfield doctor. He was his doctor, and because Jimmy was small and all, he was just really impressed because he had a horse farm, and he asked him to come visit on the horse farm. So Jimmy would go out, grandmother and I would go with him too, and we'd go out and visit the horse farm.
Where was that?
I don't know. It was way out somewhere. I remember that. I mean, I was young, and but he finally got Jimmy training into be a trainer for the horses, and then he went into being a jockey, and he ended up he was #1 in the States or something for just a short time, but he was always at the top, and a very good jockey. But anyway, he was traveling at that time, and he didn't want the house. The house was beautifully decorated. Her furniture had the big beds that the posters went to the ceiling, and the old dressers that were way down, with the seat, and had the big mirrors and all, but he didn't want any of it. And like I say, I just got married, and I wanted a pink sectional sofa. I didn't want any of that. So I got my pink sectional sofa and my little dining room suite and left all that for. I have a few pieces. That was one of their pieces over there, and that was the library table, and I decided I'd redo that, so it's lost all of its value. But I have quite a bit that was in her house, but none of the big beautiful furniture that she had. He sold it all together, just sold everything, and that's what happened. But then they tore down the house. Now I'm not sure what it is. It's some kind of big building. Somebody said they thought it was a hospital or a resting home. Or I went by there not too long ago. I saw Springfield Church was still there and the house was gone. But that was the way that house went.
Okay.
And then about that time, we're getting up to about 52. Well,
Let's
aunt
talk
was,
about your parents, too.
Okay. Well, my aunt was I'm back to my aunt. My aunt was a cheerleader at Jackson, so her name was Betty Purser, and she used to take me to the ball games, and I knew a lot of people that graduated way back then, and like she was at the time with Lauren Broadus and Ritter, Lou Ritter.
He was the mayor. He was our mayor.
All of those she went with, and so I got to meet a lot of people like that. So then, about after I was married,
How old were you then when you were going around with your aunt?
About 12.
Okay.
And she was about 18.
And where did she take you?
She'd take me to the Jackson ball games where she was a cheerleader.
Okay.
Yeah, after, she'd take me downtown, and
Right.
and we'd walk, and we were safe. But she would take me to I didn't get to go to too many, but I got to go to a few of them, and I thought I was quite big doing that. But then in about 1952, my mother turned pretty ill and needed to be close to somebody. So we moved to Springfield, and my daddy bought a cleaners on Gulfair. Butler Cleaners is still there, but we don't own it anymore. But that's when we moved to Springfield, and I was a sophomore in high school. And so I started Jackson. I made majorette, and I was a majorette, and I went to the Springfield pool, and some little guy followed me home, and 63 years later, I'm still married to him. I tried to chase him off, and he wouldn't go, but I'm glad he didn't. And so he was a football player at Jackson, but he was a year younger. He's only a month younger, but he was a year behind me in school. And we went together all the way through school and got married right when he graduated. So that's when I worked for Springfield Bank, and I was a bookkeeper. And back then, there was nothing electronic. You did everything by hand. You keyed everything in, and you did the push back and forth. And to balance, you had to balance a ledger against the first sheet against a ledger, and a ledger against a copy. And then if you didn't balance, you sat there all night till you called those checks back and balanced. And that was the way that was done. And then the checks were filed by hand in the vault downstairs. So as I told you, when I'd walk to work, the Waffle House would have my waffle made, because I don't like them real done. I like them just barely done. And they would have my breakfast ready when I walked in. Every morning I ate the same thing. And then in 1955, I got married downtown at First Baptist Church, and my reception was at the house there. And that was 1648 Liberty, at the corner of 7th and Liberty.
How long did, how long did your parents live there?
They just lived there the same 5 years I lived there.
Okay.
As soon as I got married and left, they moved back to Riverside, and Daddy still had the cleaners. And then they opened another one for my brother on Edgewood, right down from Lee High School. And Max, my husband's daddy, had a automobile, Ray Hires paint shop or automobile shop on Beaver Street, and he did all of Claude Nolan's repairs. So.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the 5 years that you lived there. So that was from the time you were about...
I was about 15, almost 16, and
Okay.
until I was 17 or 18.
Any memories of Andrew Jackson High School?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like I said, I was a majorette, and I did everything with the band and the traveling and the majorettes, and still friends with a lot of them on Facebook. And Mac and I broke up for just a little while, so I dated me a few other guys there and had a good time, but I loved Jackson. Couldn't wait to go to school, and we'd go with the hair rollers in our hair because there was no hairspray, and you didn't have a curling iron, so you go to school with your head in a scarf and your curlers and take them out after you got there and do the hair. But everybody did the same thing unless they were born with natural curly hair like some were blessed with, but not me. And our best friends were Joanne and Pancho Ferber, and her daddy owned Bailey's, which was across the street, and that's where everybody went to Bailey's Drive-In. So we spent a lot of time at Bailey's.
And what was Bailey's?
It was a drive-in.
A theater?
No, a drive-through.
Where you pull up a restaurant.
Pig stand.
Yeah, a restaurant.
They were called pig stands back then, I think, but it was a
It's right across
restaurant.
the street
Well, they
from
waited on you outside. You drove in and parked, and they came out to wait on you.
Okay. Is that where they hang the tray on your okay. Okay.
But we always went in because we got our food fairly cheap with knowing Joanne and being a real good friend. We're still friends with her. They live in Fernandina, and we live here, and we still do a lot together. But, yeah, well, that was, let's see, I was having something else. Oh, I danced at the Y all the time. I loved to dance, and I would go through a pair of ballet shoes in a night, but that was on the pier. Because you could go to the pier at the Jacksonville Beach, and it was nice, clean, fun, and you could dance all night. If you were 16 like I was driving a car, Joanne was 14 going with me. We rented an apartment and stayed there all weekend, never locked the doors. We walked to the pier and walked back, and it was just wonderful days back then. I never thought I'd get to the point where I was saying back then, because I never thought I'd be old, but somehow it got up and I am old. But I don't want to be. I mean, I'd rather be than not be, but anyway. That was most of our life there, and then...
Did they still have the Springfield swimming pool then?
Oh, yeah, that's where I met my husband.
Now, where was that?
I think it was called Boulevard. It was across Main Street on the other side. I lived on the east side, and that was on the west side. And it was a Springfield pool, and then there was a hospital there. And I don't remember just all what else. Remember there was a big old, big house, I think it was mostly marble, that somebody I knew lived in it, and I thought that was amazing. But it had some nice houses then, All the houses were mostly nice, and then by the time we left, it was beginning to, people not keeping them up. My parents sold theirs to a judge, and I don't know how long they lived there before they moved. And I think the last time I saw the house, it was a bright blue or pink or something, but, it's not totally destroyed. It could be fixed up real nice, but it's not looking too good right now.
Do you know why the neighborhood started to deteriorate?
I don't, unless people just begin to have less money, or because so many lived in apartments over there. They didn't own their home. They lived in apartments, and I was amazed because I'd never lived in an apartment, but I was amazed they had apartments, I guess. But
that houses that had been divided up into apartments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just people's homes they divided up and made apartments out of it, and so I think times just got kind of hard about then. And because I can remember when my daddy opened the cleaners, he had to open it full with all the employees, and maybe some days he wouldn't get but $2 or $3 worth of work, so it was hard right then. But then when it got going, it was very, very good, and it stayed good, and as far as I know, it still makes good money. It's in a not desirable spot right now, but right down the street from the cleaners, the girls used to go to Starbucks. They had candy, a big old thing with the candy in the, and Mr. Starbucks, Daddy'd give them
So that's not today's Starbucks coffee
No,
shop.
no. This was an old man Starbucks, and he lived over there, and had a nice little store with didn't he have milkshakes in there?
I don't know. We loved it. We'd get little teeny brown bags of candies. He had like pig's feet on the counter that, pickled pig's feet. It was just an old little store. It was real neat. We loved it.
And it was called Starbucks.
Starbucks, yeah. So Starbucks stayed there for a long time. I don't think he's with us anymore, but that was fun. And then as I had children, one of my girls used to go down and fold boxes for Daddy, and that was how she thought she was making some money. Daddy give her a quarter or 50 cents or something to come down and do boxes for cleaning, or she had a good time doing that.
So when you think about the years that you were a young adult, basically, in Springfield, what were some of the kinds of things that the other young adults did for fun? I mean, you talked about going to Bailey's, and they had the Springfield pool, downtown shopping.
And going to the Y.
Where was the Y?
It was downtown.
Okay.
On one of the streets downtown, just at the beginning of outside skirts of town. But it was real nice. And you go down in the basement, and they had all kind of rules that you had to follow, so it was a nice place you could go and be safe. And the skating rink, we went to the skating rink, which was across the bridge. A lot of us went. Everybody did the same thing. Yeah.
The Main Street Bridge, okay.
And all the kids more or less kind of did the same things. We all were involved in dancing and skating and swimming and having little parties and having the bonfires before the ball games, because it was just like Jackson, Lee, and Landon then, and big rival between Jackson and Lee.
Where'd they have bonfires?
Just any place way out they could, sometimes I think it was in the school, the back of the property they would have them, but it was just they burned the mascot from the other school or fight a little bit. And I didn't get involved too much of that, but...
And when did you leave Springfield?
I left Springfield in 55 when I got married. I got married December 55, and my parents stayed maybe another 2 years before they sold and went back to where they came from, which was the other side of town.
Okay.
And we, of course, all the kids then went to church, so we had church activities together, and we went to First Baptist downtown. My husband, before we got married, went to Brentwood Baptist, which was right there in the Springfield area. But we went downtown after we got married because that's where I went.
Okay. I have a question here. Describe a special memory of your life in Springfield. Is there anything that you haven't shared? It's kind of a special memory.
I guess finding my husband there at the pool and all the good times we had. And I had really good, because we lived at 7th and Liberty, and all the cars came from school down Liberty, so I knew everybody that came by, and my house was a good place that we just all kind of gathered and had a good time. And I guess that was real special memories. And school was special, the band, and then after I left, I didn't go back over there much for anything, because everybody by then, we all got married young. I was 19, almost 20, and when I got married. So by that time, we most had our fun.
Okay. So our last question, is there something that you would like people to know about Springfield?
Springfield was a very fun place to be at that time, and but all the good things have been torn. The pool's torn down, the library's not there, the bank's still there. I don't know. 8th and Main was a very popular place to go. You had little restaurants and things, and then I left out the Daniel Memorial Home, which was a beautiful. It's still there.
That's on,
I think it's on 7th and almost Domain.
okay.
And it's a 2-story, just a real big home now, and I don't know what it's used for, but back then it was for children that didn't have homes. And I had a beautiful little girl I went around with, and she lived there, her and her sister, and I just thought that was the prettiest place in the world. I couldn't imagine, and they had their own nice bedrooms and everything. It was a wonderful place to have for, I think it was all girls. Daniel Memorial Home, yeah. That was a special memory because I think at that age you don't remember, not all children have a family, a mom and dad, and home with you all the time, you know. She didn't even remember her mother and daddy, so pretty much my life up till now.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Thank
You're
you for
quite
sharing
welcome.
your story.
I hope I had
with us.
something that was interesting.
Absolutely.